awesome conference.
It really was.
I really had fun out there.
I enjoyed it far more than I was supposed to, but not so much that I'm in trouble.
That's always the fine line to walk.
So we got a bunch of announcements to get to, and then, of course, we'll get to calls. This program is sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. I'm obligated to say that like once every 2 or 3 years in the same way that I said it years ago, so that when people are putting clips together, they can, like, I don't know, compare my voice. I just realized I went on autopilot and did like the old intro, but we're thrilled that you're here. There's a studio audience here. We still have guests in from out of town. Some of the Faithless Forum people are lingering like a cold. And I could not be happier because I'm pretty sure there's going to be like Game of Thrones watching and I don't know, dog walking and whatever else over the next couple of days. It's also Masturbation Month. And
for mental health.
And it's Mental Health Month. It's Masturbation Month. Today is the end of Ramadan, which I will always reference instead of Ramadan now because Muslims got incredibly pissed off that people would call it Ramadan. Or ex-Muslims would call it Ramadan. And it's the funny thing is, I never wanted to draw Muhammad until somebody told me I couldn't, and now I will. And so it should be really obvious when your preferred tactic actually backfires massively. Like, tell me I can't draw Muhammad, I'm drawing Muhammad. Yeah. Tell me I can't say fuck Muhammad, I'm going to say fuck Muhammad. Tell me that, you shouldn't say Ramadan, you should just, you don't have to do that. I know I don't have to do that. I like doing it because it displeases you. As soon as your religious view gets to the point where you can't handle a pun or can't handle the fact that there are people who openly reject your religion as potentially wrong or fallacious or garbage, those people are probably right if you just can't handle that.
If you get to that point of defensiveness about it.
Yeah. But you've got some announcements to get through as well, and then callers, and because we have conferences to share, and
that is a thing. But I did want to give a shout out for the people that came out on today for the Austin Atheist Helping the Homeless.
Right.
It was an amazing morning on today. It's starting to get warm outside.
The Con Street Festival's going on, so I imagine it's a lot busier.
It was about 217, almost 220 people that came out, and we had things like bus passes, which were awesome, and people were super excited.
But bus passes? Are you trying to get the homeless to move to some other town?
Trying to get them to be able to move around our town.
Oh, there we go.
Just a little easier.
Oh, that's so nice.
So everybody got 2 of the day passes on that side that they can use at their leisure. So hopefully we can see about keeping that going. It's not necessarily free, but it's something that's worth considering going forward. That's for sure. And we had our Mother's Day, since this is our giveaway for May. We had flowers and some different cookies and things to hand out to people that were coming through the line. All the women that came through the line, and so they all got a flower. Those that wanted it, and it was an awesome time. There was like 27 volunteers that were out there working the about 13 tables or so that were out there, and it was just an amazing time. So thank y'all so much for everyone that came out for that, and the people that donated as well on that side. And yesterday was the Violet Crown Festival here in Austin, as a matter of fact. Did you know?
I did not know. Yes, all I knew was yesterday was Pecan Street, and then we went to like Esther's and hung out at a bar and rode a mechanical bull, and I was not sure what anybody was celebrating, other than I was celebrating the fact that I had a bunch of really cool friends hanging out to do stuff. So what was this other thing that was going on yesterday I missed?
Yeah, yesterday, just maybe less than a mile from here on Arroyo Seco, just right up the street, was the Violet Crown Festival, and it was just a mix of a lot of vendors. Even Claire was there selling some of her artwork on that side, which looked amazing, the stained glass artwork that she put together. But we were there. We had an ACA booth, and also representing the Atheist Experience and Atheists Helping the Homeless. And it was amazing the amount of families that came up to our table, because we had some coloring things courtesy of CFI actually here in Austin, of little dinosaurs that kids can get into. But there were so many families that were looking for atheist-related activities to do, volunteer events, social events, stuff like that. There had to be at least 10 or 11 families that came up just for that. So as the kids were coloring, the adults were over talking to us, getting the literature about where our library was, which we were like, it's right there. It's up the street. It's less than a mile away. And some of them had no idea, but they live in this area. And so I guess it's stressed for me how much we need to still let people know in this community that, this is a place that's out there, because there's so many people that didn't know, and people that were very interested in what we were doing, and the fact that we volunteer and that we get together and we have meals on Sunday together as a family here, all that kind of stuff. But it was really eye-opening, the amount of people that came up to our table and showed interest just right there in that area in this small festival that was going on. And so I thought that was really cool.
So what you're saying is that the ACA, yourself, and the other good people here went and did something that helps people while I sat around and had fun.
That's about it.
Okay.
That's about it.
I am the champion of good people. I support them from a ways back.
That's what it is. That support is always needed and appreciated. That's the way it goes. But I did want to, let me jump into something, because I will say that I have another obligation that I'll have to get to later in San Antonio, so I'll have to leave a little bit early on today's show to head out there. But I did want to talk about, for people that didn't know, I mentioned on the show before, but the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference that's coming up in October is actually on my birthday weekend up in Chicago, Illinois.
Right.
And I'm super looking forward to that. I'm planning to go. Like that is the intent. So I'm gonna try to go ahead and make my way up there. But it's a conversation that I had a couple of times at the American Atheist Convention, and there was one young lady in particular. We were out. We went out to a gay club, as you do at these things. So
what do you mean, as you do? I have yet to find a gay club for me to hang out in.
Have you not been to Italy?
Not in town.
Oh, okay. We need to fix that.
Okay.
We really need to fix that. Go to the Iron Bear or something.
There we go.
Get some free drinks there. But yeah, it was a conversation that revolved around representation, especially of people in color in the atheist community. Right. And there was one young lady who was an attendee. I'm not sure if it was her first time going to one, but I think it was. But when she told her friends and associates that she was coming out here, some of whom were atheists, some of their responses were along the lines of, well, why? Like, why are you going there? And kind of implying that, this convention, it wasn't for them, or it wasn't reaching out to them. And so we had a 20 or 25-minute conversation on the middle of the dance floor there in that gay club about that type of thing. And I think it's very important for, especially people of color. There's so many people that are out there that, don't come out to these because they think that they don't belong, that they don't have a place here. And it's partially why I wanted to do something like this, because being on the show, there was a lot of considerations that were there, but that was one of them, is because you don't see enough people of color that are out there to actually let others know, especially, African American, as religion plays such a big impact on your upbringing. And, it can be a very consuming thing, to where if you do leave that religion, you kind of in this spot where you don't really know where you belong, or don't think you really belong anywhere because you're not a part of the church. And so I'm glad that organizations like Black Nonbelievers are out there, and they're putting together this conference, which does try to hit one of those big things of these conferences are for you. And so this conference is not just for people of color, it's for everyone to go there and learn a new perspective, something that you may not have thought of or heard before.
I viewed it more as not that this was a women of color conference for women of color, but it was a everyone conference celebrating women of color and,
right.
and that portion of the movement.
And something that you don't see too often, but all the speakers there are women of color on that side, and so I'm super looking forward to that. And so, if you're out there and if you're available it's the weekend of October 4th through the 6th in Chicago, Illinois, the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference is going to be there. And so, it's something that doesn't get talked about, I think, enough. And I know Mandisa talks about it when she goes around and is on several shows, or she does speeches here and in San Antonio, wherever else. But it's something that I definitely seek to change, and that I want to change, and trying to do my little bit, being in the community, being more visible, even though I was very tentative about it even in the first place when I first started on the show. But it's definitely something that that needs to be talked about, because those conferences, the AACon was so fun, and it's like, for me, I was a part of it. This was a part of this is a part of me. This is my atheist community. This is what we do, not just because I'm on the show, but because I felt that I belonged there and talked to so many different people, met so many different people from all over the U.S., and it was an amazing experience. And so, it's just, it was a very interesting point. So I definitely want to plug those type of conferences whenever I can, because there's a lot of African Americans out there and other people of color that, there is a community out there for you. And, hopefully it's one in your area that you can attend and feel comfortable coming out to. But if not, you can always reach out look online, and find your community out there, because this atheist community, you are a part of it. We are here. It's a thing, and that contribution is something worth having.
Yeah, schedule and financing permitted. One of the conferences. I don't tend to go to conferences unless I'm speaking, just because there's not enough time, and then
Right.
I will need downtime between it. This is one of the ones that I'm going to do everything I can to actually get to. If for no other reason, then the more people who attend and support this, the more likely it is we're likely to see similar conferences spreading out across the country and potentially the world.
Right.
And as somebody who likes to learn everything every day, I'm glad that I learned that if you go to a gay club out in the middle of the dance floor, there's a deep philosophical conversation about equality and social justice going on right there in the middle of the floor.
It's right there in the middle. It's so random, but it was super organic.
That will get me out on the dance floor. That'll do it. And it should get you out there too, by the way.
Yeah.
What else have we got going on?
The only other thing I want to talk about was recovering for religion. Of course, lorelei and Gail.
Who I just got a text message from literally while you were talking.
So they talked to them several times at the American Atheist Convention in Cincinnati, and they reference how a lot of the people that actually contact them through the chat and over the phone are referred by the show. That
Right.
That we talk about. Hey, if you're questioning or you have some difficult situations that you're trying to work through and you want some more one-on-one time, or hey, Recovering for Religion has the Hotline Project, and here's what's going on. But
And tied into all that is a psychotherapy project,
Right.
and the various other things that people are benefiting from. And actually, there's a person who called the show who was there in Cincinnati who I got to meet and talk to, and I got to put her in contact with Recovering from Religion, with Psychotherapist Project, and with Secular Women, all of which have resources and things that she's going to find very beneficial as she works through some difficult times.
Yeah. But one of the things that we discussed was they have so much interest and so many people that are calling in wanting to get advice or just talk through the problems that they're going to right now as they transition out of religion or are questioning, that they're not able to answer a lot of these calls. And I think they were like 30 or 40% is their response rate right now. And so if you're interested in wanting to help on that side, you can visit recoveringfromreligion.org. Just search Recovering from Religion and click on the volunteer link in the top right-hand corner, and it'll have the information if you want to jump out there. Even if you don't want to talk on the phone, you just want to do the chat line instead, where you're just typing back and forth and interacting with people on there. There's different avenues because not everyone is a phone person. I prefer text, but it's fine. But yeah, they need a lot of help on there. So if you're interested on that side and actually want to help others that were in a similar situation that you may have found yourself in just not too long ago, then please visit there, because they definitely need some additional help. But they have all the training, they'll talk with you and they'll guide you through that process to make sure that you're being the most effective at that communication when people are calling in and looking for help, assistance, and support as they transition in their lives.
And it's another resource where you get to maintain your privacy, where they do screen volunteers to make sure that we're getting the right people involved, and then there's training as well. Anthony Magambosco and others will go through like the basics of street epistemology, or just having the conversations as it applies to people potentially calling the hotline or texting on the hotline. I got to see some of the data of how much it's grown and where the references are coming from. It's neat because I remember when the Clergy Project was first announced, and that was Daniel Dennett, Linda Liscola, and others, along with, Dan Barker. And what they did was it became like a study initially of current and former clergy people who were now non-believers. And so some of them are still in the pulpit and some of them aren't. And I thought, this is great, and it's an interesting resource. And they had a couple hundred people, and it was private. Well, the number of Clergy Project individuals is well over 1,000 now, I've been told. And I know some people with some fairly high numbers or interesting numbers in that project. And then I remember sitting down at Aposticon ages ago with Daryl and some others, and they were talking about, they just formed the Recovering from Religion Project. We're talking about the hotline and the various things, and to see how much it's grown, I'm thrilled with the work they're doing. I will always be supportive, and I'm happy that the Atheist Community of Austin and the Atheist Experience Show have contributed to that, because as we've talked about it, this has given people access to a resource that they might not otherwise have known they had. And so I would encourage, for example, all of my YouTube friends from around the world, particularly those who have more subscribers than I do, more subscribers than the ACA does, to also, add a tagline to your video that directs people to resources that are going to be beneficial to them, whether you're talking about, Pascal's wager or what Jordan, what's his name, said. Oh, that's disingenuous. I can't do Jordan, what's his name, when I've actually said. Whatever Jordan Peterson said this week that people thought was terrible, whatever else it is, you can also put a link to a resource on your video there that helps get people help. Because if all we're doing is, calling into a show and arguing for a while, that's only part of what needs to be done.
Right. The support in the community that are behind that are also important to get people to live their best lives as best as they can, at least. So.
And speaking of which, there's a caller that I think we ought to talk to at least before you head out.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
And we've got Quentin in Valley City. Thanks for waiting. You're on with Phil and Matt.
Hey, Phil. Hey, Matt. Can you guys hear me?
Absolutely.
Yes, we can.
Hey, thank you guys for taking my call, and I assume the call screener told you guys what I'm talking about today.
Yeah, it said something about your family forcing you to go to church.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a college student, 19 years old, and I don't even go to church in the same city as them. But every time I go and visit on the weekend, it's always a matter of, the question of, am I going to church with them? And I'll say no, but it always devolves into this kind of guilt trip of, well, you should be spending time with your family. And really, I can see why they want us to, spend time with family. But I mean, that's not the family time that I want to be spending. And also, I don't necessarily think they even think church is a family time.
Yeah, I don't know how I'm actually spending time with my family if we're going to sit quietly in a pew and occasionally stand up and then sit back down and then occasionally stand up and sit back down. I mean, I could get better exercise, watching, I don't know, a basketball game or something and watching other people stand up and sit down because I won't. But let me ask you this. Why don't you want to go?
Because I don't believe in it. Because I feel like I'm doing a disservice to my own family by putting on some persona that isn't me. Not only that, but I mean, along with that.
Have you mentioned that to them?
Sorry, excuse me.
Are they aware that you're, assume that they know that you're atheist, no?
Yeah, they know.
Okay. So have you communicated your concerns to them at all?
Yeah, I've talked about I've talked about, I don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. And put on, like I said, that false persona of I'm still your Christian son. I'm your son, but I'm not a Christian.
See, I would go.
Not only that, but
I would go. I wouldn't put on any false persona. I would go, and I would take copious notes, and then I would ask loads of questions after the service was over.
And I've watched plenty of your talks, Matt, and I've thought about that. And as much as I'd love to do that, and I would love to, ask those questions, it becomes a problem of me also having two younger brothers. So my family puts me in a position where they tell me that they don't want me to talk about this and influence my brothers.
Okay.
But they also want me to go with them and,
play the part.
Are you financially dependent on them?
During the summer, I would need them for a roof.
But I mean, are they paying for your schooling?
Actually, no. I do pay that myself.
Okay. Then.
And I also cook my own food because I eat differently than them. So.
Yeah, there has to be a way. There has to be a way to figure out. I mean, okay, your family doesn't want you to talk to your younger brothers about this, and my response is tough shit. I'm going to be honest with my family because I love them. I have a brother who's a Christian, and I have a niece and nephew. And what I told my brother from the get-go, actually, I'm going to my nephew's high school graduation here in a week or so. But what I told my brother from the beginning is I'm going to be honest with my niece and nephew. And I'm also going to tell them that if they have questions, they should come to you and talk. And you can, give them feedback on whether you think I'm, batshit crazy or whether you think I have a good point or anything like that. But I'm not going to lie and pretend to be somebody I'm not for their benefit. And so if they say, why does Uncle Matt not go to church? I'm going to say, because I don't believe in God and I already know more than most of the people sitting in the church know. So, yeah, I'm not getting that much out of it. But if I can't be honest around my family, then why would I want to be around my family?
Yeah. Well, I guess I haven't thought about it in that way either. It's just, it just kind of boils down to this guilt trip because, like, my brothers don't know I'm an atheist. I don't even think I've mentioned the word atheist, to my family. They just kind of know that I don't believe it.
And how old are they?
I have two younger brothers, so one's 13 and the other one's 10. And before I went off to college, I told them, I was like, I'm not going to be hanging out with you guys as much as I'd like to, but I sat them down, and my family doesn't know I talked to them about this, but I told them, I was like, don't stop asking questions. Don't take, an answer and run with it. I mean, know why. Know why you believe in something.
How absolutely maddening and depressing is it that you had to sit down with your younger brothers to give them what almost anybody on the planet should acknowledge is good advice, and yet somehow this needs to be secret?
Yeah.
Oh,
You're
hey,
exactly right.
Don't stop asking questions. Don't just accept what people are feeding you. Go out and ask more questions and be curious, and don't let people try to tell you who you are and should be. Find your own way. Trust good sources, things like that. The sort of advice that anybody should think is good, and yet you have to do it in secret. And oh, by the way, you can't tell them that you don't believe in the religion that your parents are pushing on.
Yeah, that's the kind of part that kind of rubs me the wrong way, because it's like, well, what if they do ask as to, why you go to these church services, but you don't participate in anything, you're not really enthused, but what if they come to you later and say, hey, why are you not doing anything else? They may be in the choir or, participating in the little child services, and what are you doing? Like, what are you supposed to say to that? Do your parents expect you to lie to them to say that, or just not say anything at all? Like, did they set that expectation with you that you have to lie to them, or just not say anything ever about who you really are and what you actually believe?
They don't set an expectation for me to, lie to anyone. They asked, like, for example, I went to Easter Vigil with my, my step side of the family. I have a stepmom and a stepdad, a biological mom, biological dad, and they're all Catholic. And so basically when I went and visited, and went into multiple Easter vigils, it was a matter of my family asking me, like, are you going to go? And I said, yeah, because I don't need to necessarily explain a bunch of this to 4 family members, to 4 sets of grandparents who all think I'm the poster child of their Catholic family, who is, studying to even be a priest himself.
Holy
for
crap.
a short period of time.
Is that?
Yeah, I know.
So here's something. There's a really good story from Penn Jillette that I've referenced a few times, where he will point out that if in fact you believed that there was a God and that he was doomed to hell, what kind of asshole would you have to be to not say something to that person? Now, I get that. I think it's real and true. If you're seriously convinced that there's a real problem to address, how much would you have to not like the person in order to tell them that? When it comes to that sort of proselytizing, I think that there are good responses, in the sense that if somebody comes and tells me my house is on fire and we keep checking and it's never on fire and it's never on fire every time they say this, that's an issue. But anybody who thinks that they're doing good by preaching to you and letting you know what they believe, how can they not see that if you are not convinced this is true, and you are convinced, for example, that people have bad reasons for believing, and that the church is essentially taking a portion of their funds to finance things based on something that's not true, and potentially, supporting things that are not in our best interest, how much would you have to not like your brothers to tell them about it? And when they get to be 18 and they're getting ready to head off to college, and one of them figures out, wow, actually my brother didn't believe that all this time, I wonder why he didn't mention it to me. Now, I'm not saying you should go tell your brothers. Whenever you're dealing with minor children and parental rights, it's a mess, including when it's your own family, and perhaps even more so when it's your own family. But if you're the type of person that your brothers know that you're always open to have conversations with them, you're not going to push anything on them, but you're there for them if they have questions, I think that's as good a thing as any. So when it comes to going to church, okay, I'm the type of person who would go and take notes, and right up till the point where I decided, okay, I'm done with this. You have to ultimately make a decision about where you're going to draw boundaries with your families. And as we saw, I didn't draw enough boundaries on my family all the way up until my 50th birthday when I got that card. And that's when I said, okay, this far and no further. And so don't expect, that you're going to have to do that right now at 19 while you're in college. You'll figure out the right way and how much you're willing to let them impact your life as it goes on. You don't have to fix everything today.
Yeah, that, like right now, my mom, sometimes when I go home, she does want to go to church together. And she wants to do that, familial thing where we go into, whatever church she's attending on that side. And I have gone several times to different churches that she's gone to, but it's also with the understanding that I'm not going to, play a part when I get there. I'm not going to, sit there and scream and holler or whatever else. I'm not going to, but I will listen. I will stand up when it's appropriate, when someone's coming in or as the service dictates. But when they say, bow your heads in prayer, I am not going to bow my head. I won't say anything, but I'll still just be looking around. And there's usually some kids that are, looking about, all that kind of good stuff. And so we have an understanding when I go there that I'm not going to play this part for her benefit or anyone else, because that's not.
And I'm in exactly the same position. And I think, we'll find out, I think Phil would agree with me. I would do that same thing even for religions I've never been a part of. If I happened to be with a group of people and they took me into, a Sikh temple, I would do my best to be respectful of that because I'm in their place. I'm there as an invited guest, just like you don't come in and, take off your shoes and throw them across somebody's house and, take a crap on their carpet and whatever else. I mean, there's just something about being a decent person to get along with people. Maybe a funeral is not the right place to get up and chastise everybody for believing or not believing. And maybe when you're a guest in somebody else's religious service, you should just be a respectful observer. But you also should not feel compelled to go to something and do something that you don't want to do. I think you just have to keep talking to them and finding out new boundaries and letting them know, when I go there, I feel I don't want to be there. I feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm supporting something that I don't believe in. It would be like, how would you feel if when you came to town, I said, hey, why don't you come down to the Atheist Experience TV show with me? And you'll be safe. You can sit on the other side of the glass and nobody will necessarily know that you're a believer. And you can do all that. How would they feel?
Yeah, and I've asked questions along the lines of that. So if I do go to church with my family, I'll stand, but I'm not gonna kneel. And I haven't even explained my exact reasons for why I wouldn't kneel, but I basically told them, I'm like, well, would you kneel for a God that you don't believe in? And funny enough, they give me the answer of yes, and I actually call them out on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I call them out. Yeah, I tell them that.
Right, so is that a testable
What does the first
hypothesis?
commandment say?
Yeah, exactly.
I'll bring it up. I'll be like, well, what does the first commandment say? You're doing a disservice.
Well, they'll get around that by saying, well, we're not putting that other God before our God. We're just being, blah, blah.
Being respected.
But also, I've been to midnight mass. I've been to Baptist churches, and I'm a former Baptist. And when they're doing the Lord's Supper and they pass everything down the row, I don't take the cracker and I don't take the wine, in part because I have an understanding that would actually be disrespectful to their beliefs for someone who's not a church member, not a believer, to actually partake in that. But if they...
Yeah, same reason why I wouldn't go up to get communion.
Right, yeah. It's exactly the same thing. Plus, you don't know which part of Jesus that is that you're eating.
Fact.
You could get a toenail and...
Yeah, or something worse.
Yeah.
I only like dark meat, so
there you go.
Gotta make sure of those things.
So you're not down with the blue-eyed Mormon Jesus. You want the proper,
No, the real.
The real Jesus.
Authentic stuff.
Yeah.
Let's be clear here. To whatever extent Jesus existed, his hair was far closer to Phil's than mine.
Well, yours is slightly non-existent.
Well, if you could see my hair. But anyway, Quentin, I hope that helps him. And there's a couple things. First of all, feel free to call back and let us know how it goes and what decisions you made and how it impacted you. but also it's worthwhile to look for not only local groups, but maybe organizations like Recovering from Religion, so that there are people you can talk to on a regular basis without having to, wait and hope that the atheist experience decides to take an atheist call and over a theist call, which doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciate you guys listening to, I don't necessarily want to say my problems, but just listening to my situation. And it's great that you guys are there.
You are not remotely alone.
Secular student club.
Yeah, you are not remotely alone. There's countless people who are going through exactly what you're going through.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I just hope you guys have a good one.
Yep, you too.
You as well, dude.
Thank you for calling.
Yep.
All right. Are you bailing now? It's your half-hour mark. All right. So we'll do this thing where I will go ahead and start on the next call while they're swapping stuff out. But we've got Thomas in Georgia. Thank you so much, Phil, for being here today. I will catch up with you a little later.
Oh, of course. All right. You take care.
Go do good things. Thomas, thanks for waiting. You're on the Atheist Experience with me.
Hello, Matt. Can you hear me fine? Is there an echo?
There's not an echo. I mean, it's a little hollow sounding, but I think I can understand you. What's up?
Okay, I'm not sure if you remember, but I called about 3 weeks ago when you and Don were hosting.
Yeah. I don't remember the details, but your voice sounds familiar.
Okay. Just letting you know, I had never called into a show before. Yours was the first.
Oh, wow.
This will be my second time calling.
Well, we're happy to have you call back. What's up?
Okay, so in our last discussion, we had established that, first of all, what we find is true is most likely true. Not 100% sure about anything. Would you still agree with that?
Sure, yeah. I see no path to absolute certainty, so it's all about probability and likelihood, and yeah, I think we're on the same page there.
Okay. So also, by reasonable deduction, I mean an argument whose premises are claimed to provide conclusive evidence for the truth of its conclusion. Not any sort of evidence, but conclusive evidence. So just because we don't have evidence or a certain type of evidence does not make a claim untrue as long as we have conclusive evidence. Conclusive evidence being evidence that is not contradicted by other evidence. Would you agree?
So it kind of sounds like you're reading this, and it's a little bit confusing because you're simultaneously talking about a reasonable argument having evidence that's conclusive, which for me, all that means is that there's sufficient evidence to warrant a conclusion, nothing to do with certainty, but I've reached a conclusion. But the absence of such evidence, I would agree with you that the absence of such evidence doesn't mean that the claim is false. However, that's irrelevant because the burden of proof is on the claim itself. And by the way, I'm now joined by Stephen, Rationality Rule, who's back again. So he might chime in on this, but continue.
Okay, well, I have conclusive evidence that the universe that we know is deterministic. And I doubt you can find evidence that contradicts that claim.
Okay, well, so we're starting off really, really badly because, first of all, if there is a deterministic universe, I don't know how that gets us to a God, but the universe is, in fact, largely deterministic. I think most people who would view this would opt for the soft deterministic universe because of things like quantum indeterminacy. Seems to demonstrate that it's not hard deterministic. But to some extent, the universe is deterministic at a minimum. Not only would I not go trying to argue against that other than, something like quantum indeterminacy, I don't know what it's relevant to.
Well, I would go back and refer to where I was talking about Isaac Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Sure, that's a descriptive law of physics, not prescriptive, but okay.
Going to be most likely true. Okay, in our last conversation, Don told me that the quantum world is more about probability and less like bowling balls and pins. Basically, that Newton's law of motion does not apply to the quantum world. Therefore, it is not likely that our universe is deterministic. And that's where I've done more research, and I must disagree with that claim that the universe is not deterministic. There are exceptions, but most evolutions in quantum mechanics is free evolution, meaning it is fully reversible and deterministic. You know, a wave function maps to another specific wave function. The only uncertainty comes from non-unitary measurement evolution. That's the type that, you know, the entangled and superimposed states of particles under certain conditions, like the double slit experiment. So basically, if we were going to do a double slit experiment today, let's say at exactly 5 p.m. your time, and we were to release one photon, and that photon just happened to travel through a slit on the left, there would have been no way for us to know that it would have traveled through the left slit. Therefore, we would not have been able to determine that.
Right. For the double slit experiment, for any individual photon, you can't predict which one's going to go through. But once you pass many through, you have a probabilistic distribution where it's 50-50.
Okay, so now let's say we rewinded time back to exactly 4:59 or 5 p.m.
Except we can't do that.
Again, okay, we cannot do that.
Okay.
But let's say we release that exact same photon.
Okay.
There is no reason to believe that that photon will go through a different slit. Although we are not able to determine, that does not mean it has not already been determined.
Okay. So
what I'm getting at.
What?
Okay.
So I don't think either one of us are going to disagree with that. The specific phrasing is that there's no reason to think it would have gone through another slit. Correct. That's something that would need to be demonstrated. But there's also no reason to think that it might not have gone through the other slit. That's what quantum indeterminacy is telling us, that you cannot predict that. And since we can't rewind time to do the experiment, it's not something we can test. But setting all that aside, what point are we getting to?
Well, I'm trying to get to the point that if you rewind it, these were your words, if you rewinded the Big Bang and did everything all over again, I would say that everything would happen exactly the same way.
You would say that, or I would say that?
No, I would say that.
Okay, so would Stephen.
Would you agree with that?
Stephen would agree.
I would say that.
Oh, your mic. There we go.
Here we go. Hello. I would say that I'm convinced of that, but not to a very high degree. It's just from what I've seen and what I know, I would say that seems to be the case.
That is great. So that is likely. It is very likely that if we rewinded time and replayed it, everything would happen the exact same way.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily convinced of that. I agree that it's a possibility. It may even be likely. But the fact that Stephen and you are convinced of it has no bearing on whether or not you should be convinced of it. Mm-hmm. It's not an experiment we can actually do. But for the sake of argument, Stephen will grant you that that is the case, and I will not grant you that is the case, and we'll see where we get.
Well, I mean, Matt, it's not likely that, like, why would anything else other than what has happened happen?
I don't know.
We have no reason to believe.
Okay, but no reason to believe X does not mean that you have reason to believe not X.
We do have a reason to believe it would happen in the same way because it has happened this way.
Well, only the fact that it has happened one way doesn't, that's now a circular argument. You're essentially saying the reason we believe it would happen this way if we rewound it is because it's already happened this way. But what if you rewound it 100 times and just one of those times it happened a different way?
Well, then that would mean that the conditions were different. I'm saying under the exact
conditions can't be different. That's the point.
What I'm getting a little confused off here, and it was it would have been nice to have joined the beginning just to definitely get everything in, but I think I'm up to date now. With the universe being deterministic, it seems to be that's the proposition you're putting forward, and as Matt said, I will run with that. Are you somehow saying that there must be purpose behind it because it's deterministic? I'm trying to follow what you're trying to say.
I don't think we've gotten that far, so let's go ahead and get that far. Sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
Okay, so if you were to agree that everything that has happened would happen again if you rewinded time and played it forward, which I see no reason why it would not happen.
That's not an argument for something. I'm going to have to say that every time.
Okay, well, according to Newton's law, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction.
That's a descriptive law, which isn't prescriptive, and certainly Newton's laws break down prior to Planck time, so we can't say that they would apply at the instant of the expansion of the universe.
And to add to that, I would say that while I do agree with you that the universe is probably deterministic, you can't get there with Newton's law for precisely the reason that Matt just said.
The other reason is that if Newton's law applies at the time of the expansion, then that must mean there was also a negative universe expanding in a different space.
Even if Newton's law did not apply during the very, very beginning that the Big Bang took place, if the conditions were the same, if the singularity that existed before this universe was the exact same and exploded in the exact same way, why would there be reason to believe that there would be a different outcome?
I'm not saying there's reason to believe there'd be a different outcome. I've already acknowledged that this is the thing. You keep constructing these arguments where you want to smuggle in, if you don't have good reason to think something could have happened differently, then there's good reason to think that it would happen the same. And it may be the case. It may be the case that we just don't know. But I'd like us to get to how this is relevant as evidence for God.
Okay. Well, if one of you would agree that if we rewinded time
already done
and redid okay, well, that would mean that at the time of the Big Bang, everything had already been decided.
No, not decided.
No, not decided.
Not decided. Determined. That's very different. If I pick up a die and drop it onto the table, from the instant I let go of it, that die roll is determined by everything that's happening in the universe that can potentially impact it. And so if we're going to go down this road, then if we rewound to the moment where I released it again, we would expect reasonably that the same thing would occur, unless there's some quantum indeterminacy that can affect it. But determined does not mean decided. And by using the word decided, you are smuggling in a thinking agent who's making a decision. Mechanical processes without thought behind them can and are deterministic, can be and are deterministic. There we go.
Okay, I agree.
So how does it get us to a God then if you just agreed that no thinking person decides or has to decide?
That's not what I agreed to. Okay.
Then we need to clarify what you agreed to.
Okay, you said mechanical. We got there mechanically. So my proposition to you is, if the Big Bang and all the events, reactions, and actions that followed the Big Bang, if they led us to today, me and you, and even what we're going to do tomorrow, that would mean that what we're going to do tomorrow and the next day has already been determined.
Correct. But determined does not mean, as you just agreed, that there's an agent who decided, because mechanical processes are determined. And all of the evidence that we have, that we can investigate, describes a mechanical universe, not a universe governed by a thinking agent.
So you do agree that from the moment the Big Bang happened, everything was mechanically determined?
I think Matt's granting that tentatively. I tend to agree with you. As far as I'm convinced, that seems to be the case. But Matt's point is that you can't attribute agency to the deterministic mechanisms that we're seeing.
Yeah, even if I were to agree, for the sake of argument, with you and Stephen, that from the instant of the expansion, everything that would follow was determined, and I'll just say, for the sake of this call, I'll just go ahead and agree that that is the case that I'm accepting for now. It still does not point to an agent, because determinism doesn't require an agent. As a matter of fact, determinism may be the antithesis of something that an agent could do in any other step other than being the initial start. Like me choosing when I drop the die, that may be an agent making a decision that could affect the roll. But the process of the die rolling is entirely mechanical. It's not like halfway through the roll, I decide that I'm going to get a 4.
Yeah. And if you want to make that abstraction a little further, you can say you put a dice on top of a stone and you just wait for wind to push it off. There's no decision there to make what that dice is going to land on, but if you reproduce those exact parameters, it's going to land as it landed again.
So really the question here is, how are you getting to agency?
Okay, so I agree that your example with the die, that's not that fascinating. But if you agree that since the beginning, from the Big Bang, everything was determined from that moment, is it likely that consciousness was determined from that moment?
It's definitional. It's if you agree that from the instant of the expansion everything was determined, then yes, consciousness was determined. But you say the dice example isn't all that fascinating. Well, it could be,
I believe consciousness is fascinating.
Hang on. It could be that it's not that fascinating. I didn't bring it up because I found it fascinating. I brought it up because it seemed a fairly simple example. But it might just be that you're not looking at it far enough. Because let's say 100 years ago, somebody set a die on top of a stone, and at some point the wind blew it off and no decision was made, and that die rolled down and it landed on a number, and somebody found and saw that number, and that impacted decisions they were going to make in their life, which then impacted decisions that were made in other people's life. And that ultimately led to whether or not somebody had a religious notion that prevented us from going into space travel earlier, and that changed when human beings, or that determined when human beings would then go beyond our solar system, etc. So even something as small as that die roll is still part of a broader causal chain and network. So the fact that you don't think the die roll is particularly fascinating
I'm sorry, Matt.
is...
I didn't mean to downplay the... it was a great example.
It is functionally identical to the Big Bang. Because as soon as you're talking about a deterministic universe, it doesn't matter where in the universe you start or which item you pick. It is deterministic, and the consequences of it continue to spread out for eternity.
Okay, and you do agree that consciousness... Okay, let me ask you a question. Do you believe that consciousness existed at the beginning of the Big Bang?
No.
Absolutely no reason to think that.
Okay, so you believe that it was determined that consciousness would exist at some time?
Yeah,
but you're just picking something that you find personal value in, because if the universe is deterministic, then sure, you and I having consciousness was determined, but so was babies dying from cancer at the age of 1. So was all of the plagues, etc. Yeah, I'm just saying that
I don't think the Earth existed at the time of the Big Bang, and yet it exists now. So I don't know how it's remotely relevant to talk about whether or not something existed at the instant of the Big Bang and then it exists now. Yes, we've already agreed this is determined.
It's quite interesting because you said that the example with the dice is uninteresting, and I was thinking, I find any example uninteresting. If the universe is deterministic, it's deterministic. There's not much interest to be able to ascertain from that.
So I think that consciousness is extremely complex and complicated, so I would find more interest that consciousness can arise.
But the complexity of something, or the interestingness of it to you is irrelevant. How are you getting to there must have been a God? Do you think there was consciousness at the moment of the Big Bang?
Okay.
Do you think that consciousness existed at the moment of the Big Bang?
In our universe, no.
Okay. Do you know of some other place that consciousness could exist?
I am unaware of another place other than our universe.
Do you have any way to demonstrate consciousness in any other place than our universe?
Okay, that's interesting that you say that.
It is.
Because although I am unaware of anything other than our universe, I could ask you a question that we've already went over. Can nothing exist? And practically...
And my answer is no.
So therefore...
But here's the thing. You're calling in to essentially claim that there's a consciousness behind the origin of the universe. And then when I ask you if there's consciousness at the origin of the universe, you can't... You haven't claimed it yet. What the hell happened last time you were on the show?
Yes, last time I may have stepped into that hole too fast, but...
Okay.
We could just... Okay, I just wanted to
So let me summarize, and then we'll give you one more shot at it before we move on. And that is, Stephen's in agreement with you. The human universe is deterministic, and if there was a possibility of rewinding the clock, everything would have happened exactly the same. And I'm willing to accept that for the sake of this argument. And we both want to know why it is that you're using this as a means of arguing for a conscious decider at the origin of the universe.
can you repeat that one more time?
Sure. The universe is deterministic for the sake of this argument. Now, why do you assert a conscious agent at the origin?
Okay, first, I just want to know if you think that consciousness can exist or form from non-conscious matter.
Yes.
Is that okay?
I think consciousness, I think it's best described as an emergent property of matter in motion, just as wetness is an emergent property of water molecules interacting. No individual water molecule is wet. How many water molecules do you have to have before you have wetness? I don't really know. It would seem to be enough for you to actually touch it, because wetness is a determination based on our senses and feel, which aren't going to operate at a molecular level. There are plenty of property examples that emerge from things. I think consciousness is essentially an illusion emerging from neurons firing in our head and trying to understand and interpret the world.
Okay, so that's one option. I believe there are at least two options that could be the case.
Okay.
Consciousness could be a property of matter and created from matter, or matter and consciousness could both be born from something beyond matter and consciousness.
Sure. How do you demonstrate that?
And that's pretty much it. I cannot demonstrate either one. I don't think you can either.
Okay. Whether or not we can is irrelevant. You seem to think that consciousness originates from something other than matter, because your whole point in calling was to argue for a God who created this thing. And all we're saying is we're not convinced. Neither of us are saying, oh, there's no way consciousness couldn't come from a God. But what we do know from studying the brain is that the soul is the single most dead concept in all of theology. That when we observe what happens with brain damaged patients and other things where, you get a hemispherectomy splitting the corpus callosum, and then you get two of these. I don't need to go through all these examples, but the thing that we describe as consciousness, there's no reason to think that it's magical. And so when we're talking about investigating something in a reasonable fashion, you don't get to posit an explanation for something that you have no way of testing or demonstrating. So you say there are two options. But included in your second option is that consciousness is the product of cow farts, and consciousness is the product of magical pixies who come in and tinker with neurons in my brain, or consciousness, any of those things that are unfalsifiable and appealing to something beyond matter. They're all interesting, but if we have no way of telling which one of them might be correct, then you can never be warranted in your belief that you've come across the right answer.
Okay, yes. I guess that I have to concede once again. That's pretty much my only point that I had.
Okay.
But I can see where I must concede. Thank you for having me on the show again, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for calling and having an honest conversation, because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah,
and if you come up with something better, by all means, call back. And actually, what you'll find when you listen back to this is that I use the word illusion to talk about consciousness. And I think if you look into that, you'll find a line of argumentation that says, in order for there to be illusion, there must be something that is being deceived. And that might be an interesting thing for you to look into, because it'll spawn a second conversation about how I might, in fact, be wrong.
How refreshing.
Thank you.
But
Yeah,
anyway, thanks for the call, Thomas.
All right, thanks.
See, that's what you get when you make good points and actually concede something, is that I'll give you a tip on where to go next.
Yeah, exactly. Because you want to be proven wrong. So you go,
If it's like,
hey, maybe check this out.
Yeah, when you acknowledge that Pascal's wager is an actually a garbage argument, I will congratulate you and tell you that perhaps you should look into first cause type stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Because, the ultimate goal is to find out the truth, and the best way we do that is if people were still interested in those topics. So here you go, see what you can make of this, and come back. I've got to say, I loved the end of that. It just shows that conversations can be fruitful.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be, oh, you're an idiot, you're a moron, and I'm hanging up, because that's just not always the case. And it's not just because of agreement there. There is also the point where at least we can both acknowledge we can't go any further here.
Yeah,
Because,
exactly.
there's a presupposition that's getting in the way. And you're entitled to whatever presuppositions you like. You just aren't entitled to having us agree that they're justified.
Pretty much.
You ready? Buckle up. Mr. ID in Japan, thanks for waiting. You're on The Atheist Experience with Matt and Stephen.
Hello, good morning, Matt.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
And
You hear
Stephen.
me? I'm Stephen. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I will say it's appropriate for you to say it's good morning because even though it's, a little after 5 p.m. here, I was actually up till 5:30 in the morning. So for me, it kind of is morning.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for picking up my call. And this is my first time to call here in the Atheist Experience. And I would like to share to you a topic that is so thorny and so emotional that whenever I discuss this in the online discussion forum, there are always emotions coming. The topic is called the good and evil, or long suffering, or suffering, or something like that.
Well, you're talking about objections to divinity that address the problem of evil? Is that what you're...
Yeah, the reason why I would like to talk to you today because there are many people who are saying that the reason why there is an evil, they are saying something like this: if God is good and there is evil, then there is no God.
Sure.
Or if God is good, if God is powerful, and there is evil, then God has no power. Something like that. God has something like that.
Yeah.
Some kind of a variation.
But have I said that?
No, I've been hearing this in your show before, and many. So
Yeah, I'm on record as not being a particular fan of the problem of evil as an argument against God, because I'm fine with the notion that God could be incredibly powerful and just not be good. So it's only an argument against a very narrow description of God, where God must be powerful, benevolent, or powerful and benevolent, and omniscient, because he's got to know what's going on. But as somebody who was a fundamentalist Christian for more than 25 years, I don't find it particularly an impressive line of argument. And also, when you talk about evil existing, I don't think I can view evil as something that exists. To me, evil is the label we put on things that are contrary to what we would wish for or hope or would be viewed as positive. But I don't know what Stephen's take is on the problem of evil, and since you called in to address that, I'm just going to let him kind of steer this column. I reserve the right to jump in because I can't not do that.
Of course. Yeah, I'm just listening intently, really. And if you're pointing out that the problem of evil is something that's hard for theists that believe in an all-powerful, all-loving God, then I'm right there with you. From all the conversations I've had, the problem of evil is one of the first logical breaks that a lot of religious people that I know stumble upon. I'm curious, do you believe in God yourself, or is it not the case?
Yes, I believe in the Christian God,
Okay.
and I am a freelance scientist, and I am a discoverer of the real topic of intelligence. I sometimes call it intentional. So the reason why I'm calling it now, because actually the reason why we must have good and evil as a part of our phenomena in the universe, in our existence, because we are using intelligence for our existence as human beings.
Could I ask you to spell out what you mean by good and evil? I've got a feeling there may be something smuggled in there.
Yeah, the good and evil. When I define good and evil based on the biblical and mind, the way intelligence defines it, good is something that is useful for our human existence. Bad is evil, or is something that is makes human die or help human to become non-existent.
So could we put it this way? Could we say that good helps us achieve our goals and bad makes it so that we are not achieving our goals?
No, because there are two goals. Goals for non-existence, for death, for killing people, for making them painful, or there are also another goal that's making them alive and to become existence. So, in the definition of good and evil, based on the biblical definition and the based on intelligence definition, is that good is always anything that helps humans to exist, and evil or bad or suffering or pain, something like that, with synonyms, are defined as anything or something that will harm, that will kill,
Okay,
will
so
make human non-existence.
yeah, this is me jumping in. I don't find that to be any sort of expositionary definition of it. It seems like you're kind of going with this: good is what helps us, and evil is what not. And it's curious to me because as somebody who believes in Christianity, as you say you do, when I was a Christian, good is that which God commands, and evil is that which is in conflict with what God commands.
Correct. This is correct, actually.
Okay,
If
but
you're good-
the problem is if you do that, then by definition God is good. So there's no evaluation of do you believe that there's a devil?
of course, yes.
So how did you determine that God is the good one and devil is the evil one?
Good question. The reason why God is good, because He's the God of existence. He makes things exist.
Okay,
Well,
I don't
the-
understand how that makes it good.
Well, the devil, the Satan, according to the Bible, I know you know it. The devil kills and destroys.
No, God kills
So-
and destroys, and God commands people to kill and destroy. If you go back, was the serpent in the Garden of Eden, do you think that was Satan?
Yes,
So that serpent told the truth, right?
yes,
Okay, so the serpent told the truth and didn't kill or punish anybody, and God comes in and is mad that the serpent told the truth and that Adam and Eve disobeyed, and then he punishes them. So my question still stands: how did you determine that God is the good one and Satan is the evil one, especially when your own Bible has evidence to the contrary?
the reason why God was mad on the time on Eve in the Garden of Eden, because human being has chosen non-existence.
No, because they
No, wait.
they-
You must put the context according to what
I put
God
the
is.
context in there. I'll read you Genesis if you want to. The question I'm asking you is, how did you determine that God was the good one and Satan was the evil one? You have to.
Yeah, the answer is because God is the God of existence.
That's not an answer. You might
Yes,
as well
it's
have
an
said
answer.
God is the good one because Stephen is the podcaster of UK.
No,
Existence isn't necessarily good. As a matter of fact, even within your own religion, this existence is said to be like dirty rags, and it is the existence to follow that is the one that is asserted to be good, but I have no evidence that it's actually a real existence or that it's good. So, once again, how did you determine that God was the good one and Satan was the evil one?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I answered you incomplete. The Bible said that God is existent because He exists everything, and if you are going to use
I
human
don't understand what
wait,
existence. No. I don't understand what existence has to do with it. I'm asking, how did you determine that God was good? And you're immediately pointing to the Bible, but you're not even pointing to the Bible saying God was good. You're talking about existence. So what the hell does existence have to do with good?
Yeah, because existence is good.
How do you know that?
Yeah, because because existence. If you are going to design something, for example, if you're going to our human being standard, we normally would like.
Here's the analogy that destroys that. I'm in agreement that existence is good and existence is preferable to non-existing.
Okay.
But I would also say that having money is good. But just because I'm the person who gave you money doesn't mean that I am a good person.
It's like
Okay,
you were
but-
created by your mum, if you want to use the word creation in that way.
Yeah, my mom could be
I'm
terrible.
That doesn't make
sorry.
your mum automatically good.
Sorry, Matt. I never get the analogy. Can you repeat again? I never get it.
Sure,
analogy.
I think having money is a good thing, but that doesn't
Okay.
mean the person who gave me money is a good person. That's directly analogous to your position that existence is good, therefore the creator of existence is good. The guy who created the money isn't necessarily good. The person who gave me the money isn't necessarily good just because having money is good. So once again, how do you determine that God is good and the devil is the evil one?
Oh, you're asking for absolute good.
You're the one asserting that God is good. I don't even no, stop.
Thank you.
I don't even believe that a God exists, but you're not only claiming that a God exists, but that it is good. And I'm saying, how can you know that God is good?
Yeah, because He is an absolute good. Yeah, you had given me the clue because your analogy about human being is that we are you.
Let me-
We are. You are
Hey,
based
I'm
on
an
all-
absolute good too. I am absolutely good. I just said so. That has to carry just as much weight as you claiming God is good. And I'm telling you that God doesn't exist and isn't good. And yet I exist and am good. And I just proved it by saying that I'm absolutely good.
No, you're not the creator of the universe. Sorry.
What the hell does creating a universe have to do with being good?
You're not qualified. Sorry.
I think if we can, this is the big issue that's happening here. When we first asked you to define good and bad, you were basically defining good is in what helps proliferate the human race, what benefits the human race, and bad is what doesn't benefit us. That is a very different definition, because for one, I can at least tentatively accept that. I can say, okay, I think notions of good and bad do depend on things, if not how you just described them, but relatively close to it. However, when you say that, when Matt asked you the same question and pushed a bit further, it turns out that you're defining good as something that can only come from God. So when someone like me grants that good and bad or evil exists, I'm doing it strictly with the definitions that you gave previously, not with these ones that you're working with now. So if you're defining good to be something, an edict from God or something that can only come from your creator, I don't see any evidence for that. It's kind of begging the question.
Yeah, because we human beings, we are using a standard. We are going to use a basis. We can use our own human being.
That's what I'm asking you. What standard did you use to determine that God was good and Satan was evil? That's the question.
Yeah, because the reason why God is good, because according to the Bible, He's the God of existence.
Why do I give a shit what the Bible says?
Because of intelligence.
I would argue that because of intelligence, I absolutely should not care what the Bible says.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely good, which means I'm right.
Do you want to know what I would do if I was the bad guy?
What would you do?
First,
I would write on a bit of paper, I'm the good guy, and give it to you.
Yeah.
First, you must nail down the topic of intelligence to claim that you.
You're using your intelligence to read that bit of paper, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
No,
I'm the good guy.
No.
Let's try to keep this as simple as possible. There must be some standard by which you are judging God to be good and Satan to be evil. What is that standard? Because if the standard is God said so, well then guess what? I am absolutely good because I said so.
Okay, so the one standard that I've seen based on intelligence and based on the Bible is that God was the one who designed life. And since He was the originator of life, He has the very right to take life.
Hang on. Do you have children?
But Satan has...
Do you have children?
Not create... What?
May I ask if you have children?
Yes.
Do you have the right to kill them?
No.
Then why is it different for God?
Because I did not create my children.
What does it matter
I did
if
not
you
create life.
What? So if I
That went over my head. That's the level of...
So, first of all, I reject your bald-ass assertion that because someone can create something, they then can destroy it without being viewed as immoral. But second of all... But we're asking what the standard is, and you have yet to give any sort of standard by which you can determine that God is good. And by the way, are you a flawed being?
Flawed? What do you mean by flawed?
Are you a perfectly reasoning being?
No, I don't think so. I
don't think so either, because I don't think I am. But I'll claim that I am for the sake of argument.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So if you have some standard by which you're judging God, how do you know it's the right standard?
Yeah, the reason why it is the right standard because it works in reality.
No, it doesn't work in reality because there's no evidence for a God actually existing in reality, and there's evidence against the proposition that the God of the Bible is good. Because, for example, if you're a good God, would you ever tell people to do something that is immoral?
No, there is no immoral in God.
Is it immoral to own other people as property?
If God say yes, no.
Fuck that.
This reminds me of
this is by definition special pleading now because you know where we're going.
No, go on.
No.
You've defined good as whatever this being with all power, etc., demands is good. And you've literally just said, if that being says that owning humans is good, you're saying, yes, that's good. Anyone with any kind of integrity knows that that is bollocks.
I mean, this goes back to the Greeks and the Euthyphro dilemma. With respect to piety, but it can change for this, which is, is something good because God says so, or does God say so because it's good? Because if it's the former, then what you have is divine command theory, and you don't have anything about morality related to goodness. You just have a list of this is what God allows and this is what God doesn't allow. So that when God allows slavery, it's good. When God tells you to kill your child, it's good. When God tells you to go slay all the Midianites and keep all the young virgins for yourself, it's good because God said so. Well, I reject that because I have an understanding of morality and good and evil that transcends what the ancient Israelites wrote down without any evidence.
I don't accept that because you are not the creator of the universe. I'm sorry.
And I reject your assertion I reject your assertion that someone needs to be the creator of the universe in order to have an understanding of morality. So now where do we go? I'm going to reject your bald-ass assertions.
This is so circular. It's God exists. How do you know God exists? Because good exists. How do you know good exists?
No.
Because God exists.
The reason why God exists is because of intelligence.
What? That's not an argument. That's barely a comprehensible sentence.
Ironically,
what do you
unintelligible.
Mean, what do you mean God exists because of intelligence? Because every time you've uttered that, if in fact God exists because of intelligence, you are disproving God in the act of saying that unintelligent phrase.
Well, maybe I will call next time for this topic because this topic is too long. But for now, I would like to talk about the good and evil. And I know that we never agree with each other, but I would like to share to you. No, I mean, I just would like to share to you that my point, my input about good and evil.
Well, why don't you want to share your point about intelligence if that's the key factor?
Well, because I don't have a time to continue right now.
Okay, call us back another time. Thank you for your time. All right, so we've got, hey, this one will be old home for you. We've got Mark in London. Thanks for waiting. You're on with Matt and Stephen.
Hey, Hi, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, it sounds like there's an airplane in the back.
It does.
Or a vacuum cleaner.
We have.
It's my laptop.
Big fan.
Yeah. Well, no worries. It is, yeah. So my question is, I'd actually like to continue on the previous point. I'm just trying to remember what my point was. It was,
why is it unreasonable to believe in a God?
We can.
Well, that's literally what's written down by the call screener here. That's why I went with that.
Actually, I wanted to just touch on the slavery topic. And
okay.
The reason, so what was your point about the slavery in the Bible? You said that it was wrong or something like that. Why would you believe in a God that slaves people or something like that? Was that your point?
The point was, if we're in agreement that slavery is immoral, that it is immoral to own people as property, that it is immoral to beat them, and not be punished, that they're property that you can pass on to your children, then it seems to be a problem if the all-wise, all-knowing, good God of the universe expressly instructs people that they can and can have slaves and can enslave the heathen that surround them, and then come up with a different set of rules for Jewish slaves than for the non-Jewish slaves.
I've got two arguments for that. My first argument will start with a question, which is, would you agree that you're limited in your lifespan and in your understanding of reality?
Yes.
Yep.
But God isn't.
I don't know that there is a God, and I don't.
Right.
But here's the thing. Do you think that slavery, that it's moral to own people as property?
This is my second point.
Well, that's a question. You asked me one. I was going to ask you one.
I'm going to answer it now, which is, did you live in that society, in that specific time, in that specific culture?
Did I? Is that the question?
I'm assuming you didn't live in.
Correct. And I'm assuming that you understand it doesn't make a shit's bit of difference whether I was there or not. I'm being asked to evaluate it. And at no point does it say in Exodus 21 that this law only applies at this particular time, nor is it the case that something is moral in one time and not moral in another time.
Well, didn't Jesus come and change the law?
No, Jesus came to fulfill the law. Not a jot or tittle of the law would exchange. What he came to eliminate was sacrificial laws, so that we didn't have to keep murdering animals because God likes the smell of blood and smoke.
What did Jesus say about slavery?
Yeah, exactly what did Jesus say about slavery?
So instead of, I will answer your question. It's just
I bet you won't.
so. So instead of, so what did he mean by fulfill the law? He meant.
I see, like I said, I bet you wouldn't answer the question. What did Jesus what did Jesus oh my God, what did Jesus say about slavery?
I'm going to answer the question if you let me speak.
I did let you speak.
So this is the thing. If you ask me a question, it manipulates the conversation in which I can't actually.
No. That's how conversations go. If you're just going to sit here and obfuscate,
because if
okay, you want to know how conversations don't go? I'll show you.
Right. Okay. What's the question?
What did Jesus say about slavery?
Nothing.
Correct.
I know about.
Correct. Now, if God comes down and he knows that people have written down something that's wrong about slavery, and he comes down and he takes human form and begins to teach, don't you think it's incumbent upon God to say, hey, that stuff you wrote about slavery before was wrong?
Another point that I made earlier. You're limited, I'm limited, we're here for a short amount of time.
I'm unaware of anybody who's not limited, but I am not aware of how an unlimited being, I'm not aware how an unlimited being, even if one were to exist, in any way changes whether or not it's moral to own people. Are you arguing? Are you arguing that at one time it was moral?
Yes, because
then you are grossly immoral.
In that time, in that specific culture.
Does the Bible say that the rules for slavery in Exodus 21 have a time limit?
No, but it was written at that time.
I don't. Well, so was thou shalt not kill. Is that time limit run out? Then what you're engaging in here?
Because Jesus came in at a different time period, and
what the hell does that matter? What?
It matters because it was a different time period.
And he said nothing about slavery.
He doesn't say, "Hey, there's new rules for slavery." Did Jesus say there were new rules for slavery? Did Paul?
Well, if there was a reason, because at that point...
I would argue that the reason is anybody who picks up the book can say, hey, the book sanctions this. So if you go back to Exodus, you get the 10 Commandments, you get thou shalt not kill, and you get thou shalt not kill, and you can own slaves. At what point was either of those changed?
I would agree in 2019 that Exodus 21 or 35, whatever it was, is probably not relevant today. And probably
I didn't say it wasn't relevant. Why is it you can't address the issue at hand? I didn't say it wasn't relevant. I said it advocates, keep interrupting. I said it advocates for something that is immoral. And you're arguing that somehow or another, the slavery laws were moral once and are not moral now, but thou shalt not kill remains.
Yeah, but that's in the context of specific passages in the Bible at a specific time frame.
What context could ever make slavery? What context could ever make slavery moral?
In 21st century of 2019.
I don't give a rat's ass about time. What context?
There needs to be a context. I'm telling you the context, which is the history and the culture in which people live.
I'm not aware that you know the history of the culture, but what you definitely don't know is that it is not relevant. How does a passage that says you're allowed to own slaves and beat them, which has never been superseded by thou shalt not own slaves and not beat them.
That would have been a great commandment.
It would have been a perfect one. Thou shalt not own people. But you're essentially, with no evidence, with no other passages to cite, saying, yeah, the slavery laws, they're no longer there. But my question is, how were they moral at the time, if that's what you're going to argue?
Jesus said there is no Jew, no Greek, so that shows that there isn't.
What the fuck difference does that make to Exodus 21 on slavery?
It doesn't matter what culture.
Jesus also saying, I did not come I came to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But none of that has anything to do. This is Mark, this is real simple. I understand the context and you don't, but here it is. Here it is.
All right.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Once upon a time, the instructions that supposedly came from God allowed people to own other people as property and to beat them as long as they didn't die. How was that moral at the time?
Well, you're not reading, you're paraphrasing what you understand about the specific cultures that are...
All right, smartass.
You'd have to actually read the scripture in the context.
He's getting out the bad book now.
I can see I'm watching the show.
Yeah. Thanks for not answering the question, by the way. Thanks for not remotely answering the question. I specifically asked, how was that moral at that time?
Look, I don't know the culture, so I can't answer that.
Okay, bye.
I don't know.
You don't call in to say that that something didn't used to be moral. And then when I ask you how it could be the case that something like slavery could be moral at one time and not another, and then you say, I don't know. Why'd you call?
It's such a peculiar one. I mean, at the very least, he sits in this situation where he knows that slavery is wrong today.
Yep.
And he has to reconcile that with the fact that an all-powerful, almighty God hasn't sent some kind of next Jesus or next message to at least say, ooh, really screwed up there, or it's no longer applicable in this situation. By the way, when I say do not murder, it turns out I mean only under certain circumstances, etc. The backflips are crazy.
Oh, well, that thing from the Old Testament still applies, but this other thing from the Old Testament doesn't still apply. And your justifications for that is whatever. Yeah, I'm actually getting to that. And that's why when we asked what Jesus had to say, he correctly got it as nothing. But when I asked what Paul had to say, he didn't actually address that, because what Paul had to say was, slaves, obey your masters, even the cruel ones. Now, I argue that what Paul said is grossly immoral too. So not only do we not have a correction from Jesus, we don't have a correction in the entire New Testament. And Paul, who is the true founder of Christianity, not Jesus, specifically says, slaves, obey your masters. And to me, as far as I can tell, the only moral thing you can tell slaves is to get yourself free and take as many people as you can with you. But
What a topic.
yeah. But, what do I know? Because clearly I wasn't there. The types of arguments that we get on this show there are people who email the show and who say, why do you only let the stupid people talk? Why is it that every Christian who calls your show is an embarrassing excuse for an apologist? Why don't you actually you know what? I tell them, you're welcome to call in. You're welcome to have your pastor call in. You're welcome to contact your favorite apologist and have them call in. But when it comes to this issue of slavery, there's a reason that I bring it up almost every freaking week. And that's because at a debate in Dallas, I stood there with four Christian apologists standing around me. I brought up this issue, and they all had each of them had a different response to this. And so I looked at them and said, okay, you guys sort it out. And when you come to a consensus on what the correct apologetic is, I'll address that, because I have better things to do with my time than address 4 different varieties of Christianity on a topic that should be one of the easiest fucking questions in the history of the world.
Pretty much.
All right. David in Georgia, thanks for waiting. You're on with Stephen and Matt.
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
Good.
Hello?
Yeah. I hurt my back a little bit last night riding a mechanical bull, but that's because it was already mildly hurt. By the way, update on my friend who's in the hospital. Still, they've taken him off the coma meds, but he's still mostly out. One of the nurses said that he was mildly responsive at some point, although his fiance's been there and she hasn't got him to really respond. They're still doing dialysis. There's still a problem with the kidneys. There's still a problem with sepsis related to that. There's a heart that's pumping at 25 to 30%. He's still on oxygen, and he's still been out for over a week. There are some signs that would lead us to be optimistic, and there are also signs that say there's a really hard road ahead and that he might not survive. So that's the update on that. I know that's not what you asked, David, but I wanted to not forget to mention that today since I mentioned it last week.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, man. Your friend will be in my prayers, and I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, despite the fact that he's an atheist, I can confirm that he actually would be grateful that he's in people's prayers, because he understands that that's what people say when they can't actually do anything and are feeling frustrated, is I'll pray for you, or I'll hope for you. So, yeah, you're not going to offend him. He'll appreciate the caring.
Prayer is very effectual when it's in God's will.
Well, you have no demonstration that prayer works at all.
Well, it's hard to demonstrate anything to a solipsist, which is the nature of my question and the things that I'm going to bring up today.
It's not the fact that I may or may not be a solipsist. It's the fact that there isn't.
You've admitted that you're a solipsist on multiple occasions.
What's that?
You've admitted on multiple occasions that you're a solipsist.
Yes, depending on the definition of solipsism that we're talking about, I have clarified that. But it's not the solipsism that is a problem with demonstrating that prayer works. It's actually studying prayer.
It's very hard to convince a solipsist because you can't convince them anything outside their own mind.
No, that's actually not true. You can convince me of countless things. I am actively convinced of countless things. I am constantly being convinced of things. So let's try not to pretend that there's something defective about solipsism that is why you can't prove prayer works, because we can prove that a pen works, we can prove that a computer works, we can prove that a calculator works, we can prove whether or not a particular medication, we can prove that whether or not a particular, we can prove that whether or not a particular medication works, but when we test prayer, we find that it works at the rate of chance, which means it doesn't work.
Well, then that brings me to my basic question of all this, Matt. What is your qualifications for judging anything in relation to God?
Evidence.
Same as yours.
No, sir. What is your qualifications for evaluating any evidence? What are your credentials for evaluating anything if you can't be convinced of anything outside your own mind?
Okay, listen, did I not just explain that I can be convinced of things?
Well, no, I mean, I just listened to the previous call about the slavery thing. Nowhere in Exodus 21 does it use the word slave. It uses servant. Servant is
Goodbye.
completely different.
There's been a few of these.
Buy yourself a fucking thesaurus and actually study the Hebrew word involved. Because if you want to say that it's a servant that you can buy from the heathens who are around you, who are now your property that you can beat as long as they don't die within a couple days, now you are making the weakest possible excuse for your shitty book by saying that it doesn't. You know what other words aren't in there? Trinity is not in there. Actually, Dan Barker has a list of all the words that Christians presume are in there that are not in there. You know what else is not in? Oh, well, the Constitution doesn't say separation of church and state. You're correct. Those words don't actually appear there, but the concept is there.
Mm-hmm.
You know what else? It wasn't written in English, dumbass. You might as well be saying the original word there is in Hebrew, and, well, you know, I don't know Hebrew, so it doesn't say slave. Unbelievable. You know, so let's do this, even though he's not here.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm a solipsist. There's a difference between hard solipsist and soft solipsist or weak solipsist. And for me, the distinction is a hard solipsist is someone who is convinced that they are, in fact, the only mind in the universe.
Okay.
Whereas a soft solipsist is somebody who recognizes that they cannot demonstrate conclusively that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
I think I actually have good arguments against solipsism in the sense that, and my strongest one is this, I have learned things from what appear to be other minds. Okay? There are people who taught me something that I did not previously understand. And in order for solipsism to be true, I would not only have to be inventing the person who taught me, pretending that I didn't know, and also inventing a history where they wrote about these things before I existed. So all of history would have to be invented on the fly for me. That is a level of absurdity that I just can't accept, and so I'm fine with the notion that there are, in fact, other minds in this universe, and I share it with them. My position as a solipsist is that I cannot conclusively prove that. That's it.
It seems very similar to like epistemology, where people will say, and what do you know for sure? Do you know for sure that the Earth is a sphere? And I have to say, if we're talking on the meta level here, no, I don't.
I don't know
and
anything.
And they go, oh, therefore you can be convinced of anything. I'm like, no, it doesn't work like this.
I've used lots of chess analogies over the year. My favorite one is that just because I don't know what the best move is and can't demonstrate to you what the best move is, that doesn't mean there's not a best move. It also doesn't mean that I cannot be convinced of what the best move is once I'm actually shown and demonstrated this is the best move.
I think what's particularly hilarious as well is with the accusation of saying that you can't change your mind or essentially that you don't know anything for sure, is the very reason you can have this soft solipsism view is because you've looked at the evidence to get to the conclusion that you have.
I became convinced that I can't demonstrate anything to an absolute certainty.
Exactly.
And if that's your standard for knowledge or proof or, sufficient evidence, then we're stuck. But yeah, I've been convinced of loads of things over the years, and including things that are outside my mind, including the argument I just made, that while I can't demonstrate I'm not the only mind, I am convinced, in fact, I'm not. In part because I've run across people who can teach me things, and I can go back and look at what they've said in the past, and it's consistent, and I didn't understand it then. Just like, I still don't, I still don't understand quantum mechanics, string theory, calculus, other things like that. I recognize that there are people who apparently do because they create models that consistently demonstrate things. Yep. And so I have a level of confidence in people who have a demonstrated expertise and who can present the evidence for their claim. So I'm in a position where, for example, I accept that Big Bang cosmology is the best current explanation of the origins of the universe. I don't understand it fully. My confidence level in Big Bang cosmology is somewhere north of 50%, but is not 100. And I couldn't possibly be honest about a confidence level for something that I don't understand sufficiently. And yet I'm willing to accept that there are people, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, who understands those things better than I do. I also know that I could go and study the things that Neil did, and provided they're not beyond my ability to understand, if I applied myself, I think I could learn those things. They're just not my particular field of interest. So I am a soft solipsist, but not a hard solipsist, because I find that more absurd than the contrary proposition. It reminds me of conspiracy theory kind of thinking, where in order for you to be correct about this conspiracy, you have to have these 50 things all line up, and they're all outlandish, or a good chunk of them are outlandish. And so it gets me back to David Hume, which is when somebody tells me that a man was resurrected from the dead, I have to ask myself if it's more likely that they were deceived or deceiving me than that the thing is true. And then Hume's axiom, to reject the greater miracle. And it's important, he doesn't say accept the lesser miracle. He just says reject the greater miracle. So this isn't about, oh, I found a right answer. It's about avoiding a wrong answer, or one that's likely wrong.
Yep. But it's so frustrating. It's like the best type of people you'll find when it comes to intelligence is people that can admit that they don't know anything really with certainty. There's like maybe a few things. And yet that's the thing that you get criticized for by people who pretend to know the answers. Somehow that's a weakness. It's beyond me. It's really, really peculiar.
And when you follow it up with the word slave is never there, when what the book says describes slavery, a rose is a rose is a rose. I don't care if you call it a fucking chrysanthemum.
Yep. Something is what it is, and it's not what it's not. And if you call it by a different name, such as servitude, it's like North Korea. It calls itself a democratic republic. It's not.
Yeah. All right, we got a couple more calls to get through. We're already over time, and I'm going to try to get through these. We've got Zach in Fresno has a question about Matt's compatibilist views in terms of rationality, which you might not be up to date on this, but we'll go ahead.
Yes, sorry. So I realized at the end of the show, so I'll try to make this as quick as possible. And to be honest, your previous dialogue with Phil there might be a sufficient answer to this question. But a while ago, a long while ago, you had a debate with a gentleman named Eric Hernandez on the existence of the soul.
Yes.
And at some point in the debate, he challenged you, Matt, about how you could trust your own thought processes if everything was in fact determined. And at the time, the answer you gave, I felt like you made a pretty good point. But I thought about it a little more, and I'll just try to lay this out as clearly as possible.
I can actually address this real quick, because it's easy. Whether or not my thought processes are determined is utterly irrelevant to whether or not they are accurate. And so the accuracy of my thought processes are tested by reaching conclusions, making predictions about the world, and then seeing if they come through. It's the same way you would test anything, any hypothetical model, is to put it to the test and see what kind of predictions you get back. That lets you know the reliability of the model, and whether or not it's a deterministic process in my brain, or whether or not there's a soul or some indeterminacy or some switch flips, it doesn't matter. The determinacy part is irrelevant, because in a deterministic universe or in a non-deterministic universe, I have thought processes that are either going to be accurate or not. And the one and only test of how accurate my thought processes are is how they consistently lead to useful and accurate conclusions.
Okay. And I guess you don't care if those, like, useful and accurate in this instance, it doesn't have to be absolutely useful or absolutely accurate?
No. I'm not sure how anybody could demonstrate absolutes in that sense. So, for example, I play a lot of games. I love games. In many games, I'm up against other people. And so there's this really cool aspect of game theory there where I'm thinking about what the other person is doing. And for that, I have to have a theory of mind, a theory that there is another mind there, and try to make predictions about what that person's doing. Sometimes you're going to get it right. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong. But there are people who are better at this and people who are worse at this. But when it comes to something that's not that kind of game, where I'm trying to make an understanding of the universe, then for those sorts of things, it is about assessing the evidence and making sure that I'm removing as much bias as I can. I don't know that I could ever remove all bias. And the test for that becomes, if Stephen comes to me and says, "Oh my gosh, you've got a hidden fallacy here," and he shows me, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that actually, I smuggled a premise in there and I had no idea." What that does is it recognizes that there is a model that I improperly exercised and that I can recognize this and correct for it. And at no point does that mean that either of us was actually correct, because my conclusion might have been correct for the wrong reasons. He could still spot a fallacy, and it could be that we're both wrong. But this process of constantly improving your reasoning abilities through critical thinking, skepticism, scientific methods, things like that, they are demonstrably the most reliable methods to an accurate understanding of the world. We got.
I got to yield. So.
Oh, okay. I'm going to try and get the other call, but I'm also going to let Stephen address this offline because you've got like a hum on your line. But I don't know if you had something to add or correct.
No, not really. There is no hidden fallacies from what I could tell.
But, and we could both be wrong.
Exactly. What was interesting there is the topic of determinism, and whether or not the world is deterministic or not doesn't need to necessarily be conflated with or have some kind of issue with epistemology. They're like separate things to me. So I was a little bit confused by how the two.
You would have been very confused, as was I, on Thursday when Eric Murphy debated David Wood. I was there, and one of the things that he pointed out was that an atheistic universe is necessarily a naturalistic, deterministic universe. And I'm like, wow, those things aren't necessarily connected the way you'd like to. This guy supposedly has a PhD in philosophy, but his main argument was that in a deterministic universe, there is no reasoning or rationality. And so the question that I asked during the Q&A was, does playing a game of chess require reasoning and rationality? And David said yes. And then I asked him when Google's DeepMind got a soul that allowed it to escape a deterministic universe, because the AI is clearly deterministic, whether it's in a deterministic universe or not. That's the way it's programmed. And yet, without giving it any backstory on chess games or chess history, and just telling it what the rules of chess are, and giving it an artificial intelligence that allows it to analyze and play itself, it learned everything humans know about chess within 4 hours and can beat all of us. So it could beat me probably in about 15 minutes or less. If that's the case, and it requires us, if chess requires reasoning and rationality, and you have a deterministic computer that is able to reason about a chess game better than any of us, then clearly your premise is flawed, that you can't have reasoning. You know? And he's like, well, you can program a calculator to say 2 + 2 = 5, but that doesn't make it reasonable or reasoning. And you're right.
It's just a difference of complexity. And differences, like with what we were saying here with alpha, it's just able to process more information. And what happens in the end is the move that it makes looks very informed, very intelligent, very conscious. We happen to know it's not. And so we can extend that further.
I was going to continue after that, but, it wasn't my debate and wasn't my questions. There was a guy that came up afterwards who was an engineer dealing in AI and data stuff. I'm going to post a video. In addition to Eric's debate, I'll post a video of Eric and I discussing that. But also, I'm going to discuss what happened after the debate during the questions. Because I was going to extend that, if I had time, to say, okay, you want to write off a computer as deterministic as not being able to reason. And my argument is that it can reason. And that the only functional difference between that level of AI right now and my brain is that they're different in how they process things. And mine is the product of millennia of evolution of a data processing, world interpreting machine. And so perhaps mine is more efficient. Mine is more currently superior in some aspects of analyzing reality. But I don't see how you can say that an AI isn't doing exactly what I'm doing, and in some cases doing it better.
Yeah, if we define reasoning as looking at the rules and playing according to them, then it is literally reasoning. And when it comes to us, it's like, we may be more complicated still, or be able to function on a different wavelength to the machines, but the machine isn't always thinking, damn, I'm hungry, or let's go sleep. So this is predominantly why alpha is so good at chess. It can just do chess. And they've extended that to StarCraft now, and it's working with incomplete information.
They're also going to be extending it to medical research.
Scary good.
Yeah.
Scary good.
It's an interesting thing. The guy afterwards was talking to me about, well, the real secret to AI is the data and how it processes data. And I'm like, yes. And that's the real secret to what's going on in my brain. And if there's anything there that is confusing us, it's because I would argue that it's the thing that we label intuition. Because our brains seem to have a capability of quickly assessing data and leaping to what we would call an intuition. Like, I feel it's this way. And I don't know why that can't be viewed as just I'm making a probability assessment, and as long as those particular probability assessments keep being useful, then that intuitive part of my brain, which I don't think intuition is the right label for it, but that we call it that jump, that I'm going to quickly skip through all the data to find the one thing in the data that is relevant. That's how we tune it. That is tuning your brain, so that you don't, I'm going to rely on my gut. Well, you can train your gut in that sense.
Yeah.
Obviously, my stomach's not thinking, so if you're going to call in about that, that's not what I was saying. Bill in Florida, you get to be next to last.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. So, my question is, well, I have several questions. I'll try to make it quick. But if Christianity were true, would you believe it? And secondly, what would you deem as proof of God to where you would believe it?
Yeah, I've already answered this question a bunch of times. I'll give it to you if you want, but I'm mostly going to let Stephen address this. The one thing I will point out is when you say, if Christianity were true, would you believe it? The answer is maybe, because it's not that something is true that makes it belief warranted. It is whether or not you have sufficient evidence for that proposition to warrant it. There could be, a diamond the size and shape of my head on Venus. That could be true, but without the evidence to support that, I could not believe it.
Right.
So I think
what evidence would you require to be sufficient?
I'll let Stephen go, and then maybe I'll give mine, because mine's.
That is a very good point you're raising there that I actually haven't considered. So we definitely.
Well, it came up in the debate with Cy, and
I'll
do that another time.
Sure thing. So really, I know you said the Christian God, but it depends on what interpretation of the Christian God, because that changes it quite a lot as well. And what would basically extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So it would take extraordinary evidence to convince me, because so far as I've observed, the universe does indeed play under the rubric of naturalism. I have no examples where I can solidly say that's a break from naturalism. For Christianity to be true, that needs to be broken. Humans don't resurrect. Here's another thing. So that has to be untrue as well when it comes to Christ resurrecting. We happen to know that consciousness, that minds are predicated upon brains, and that if you damage the brain, the prefrontal cortex, or whatever it might be, it directly affects the mentality and the consciousness of that individual. And so we have every reason to believe that when the mind completely goes to kaput, when you die, you're gone. Your consciousness is gone. That would have to be overturned. So basically, it's not like I'm shut off from it. It's just I'm at this point where extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that's what I would require. The second thing that you asked was about what would I do about it. And here's something that some people find interesting. Let's say that the God of Christianity existed for the very reasons that we've brought up today, and for more, such as the slavery in the Bible. I would not worship that God, and I wouldn't believe that that God is moral. Because a lot of people think that if you was to believe that the Christian God exists, then it also follows that you would worship the Christian God, and that you would believe that the Christian God is right and moral. These things don't logically follow. So, for example, take the story of Adam and Eve. The idea of punishing someone, treating them badly, giving them hell, or whatever it might be, because one of their fathers or mothers, etc., basically their lineage, did something wrong, is a horrifically disgusting moral paradigm that people don't seem to be able to shake off. For me, that on its own is problematic.
On that real quickly, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if Okay, I understand what you're saying, but the problem with that assumption is that if we're going to call something a miracle, or you're talking about evidence of this and you want visible verification, in order to know or call something a miracle, you would have to presuppose naturalism. But from an atheist worldview of just time and chance acting on matter, there's no rational, logical reason to assume naturalism.
Well, not only no. So first of all, you don't have to assume naturalism in order to be capable of demonstrating that the supernatural. Science relies on methodological naturalism, which is not the assertion that only the natural world exists or can impact reality, but that we cannot make appeals to things beyond natural until such time as they've been demonstrated and we have a model that shows, hey, here's how things outside of nature interact, and this is how we can warrant calling them probable causes for something. So
that would require the principle of induction, and what I'm saying is that the future has never been observed or scientifically proven, and so really what we're left with...
You know what else has never been observed or scientifically proven? Miracles.
Right.
There's also a stronger point to be made here.
What I'm saying is that a miracle, let's say someone walking on water, that would have to be something that would happen outside of the ordered realm of our universe. But that would beg the question, why is our universe an ordered realm? And, if I were to come on your show and say, well, God exists and it's just that way, that wouldn't be a logical, rational answer for you.
I agree. And what we're pointing out is we have to work with the evidence that we have. And right now, there isn't sufficient evidence to accept that there's anything that is supernatural or that there's anything that...
From your own espoused worldview, there couldn't be a miracle.
No. Stop telling us that there couldn't be a miracle under my view. I am perfectly willing to accept a miracle if, in fact, you had... Stop.
How would it be a miracle?
Stop.
I'm just asking.
Stop.
Okay, I'm listening.
I'm perfectly happy to accept a miracle if there's evidence for it. Do you have evidence for a miracle?
I don't have evidence for a miracle.
Congrats.
But what I'm saying is that logically and rationally, for you to call something a miracle, it would have to be something that happens outside of the natural ordered realm, which then begs the question of
we are not
natural.
We are not precluding things happening outside of the natural ordered normal realm. We are not saying
it becomes
Jesus Christ.
Perhaps, Bill, we can just put it this way.
We are not saying these things don't happen. We are saying, do you have evidence that these things do? And you just said no. So until that changes, we're stuck. There is not sufficient reason to accept that these things happen until you give the reasons that these things happen, or the evidence for it.
Do you reject the miracle claims that are in the Bible?
I do not accept... Look, if somebody comes to me and says they were abducted by aliens, I'm willing to believe that they've had some experience that they are honestly trying to convey, but that doesn't mean that their understanding of that experience is actually accurate. And so, yes, there are claims of miracles in the Bible, and I do not believe that those things occurred because a claim is not sufficient evidence. It's not the level of evidence that you would need for something extraordinary.
Or you could put it this way. Bill, one sec. You could put it this way. I reject the miracles of the Bible for the same reason that I reject the miracles of the Quran. Muhammad flying to the moon, for example.
Yeah, it's not the fault of science or people with sound epistemology that miracle claims don't fit into that category.
And also, by the word reject, what I'm getting at is that I'm not convinced that it's true.
Correct.
But what I'm saying is, based on the principle of induction, from that standpoint, then, from your own worldview standpoint, there couldn't be...
That's not true. It doesn't matter how many times you repeat that. It is the exact opposite of what we've both said. We are not precluding the possibility of miracles. We are observing that the universe appears to be naturalistic until such time as there's evidence for something beyond that. Just like human beings appear to not be able to fly until there's such evidence that they can. Did you get all that down when you were typing it up? So while you're typing, I'll go ahead and and give you my take, because I'm not very different from Stephen on this. And that is, I have no idea what would convince me that a God exists. I don't. It would be arrogant of me to assume that I can tell the difference and that I am a supernatural detector that can detect the difference between a God and some other technology or whatever that I don't understand, because I understand I can be fooled. That is not a denial of the supernatural. It's not saying I can't be convinced. It's recognizing that I don't currently know what would convince me, because there are plenty of other things that I don't currently understand well enough to know what would convince me. What I can tell you is that a claim about this is not convincing. A report that at one time people saw somebody walk on water, well, I watched Dynamo do it, and I'm not impressed by Dynamo doing it. And the curious thing for me is that these miracle claims seem to have declined in directly related to our ability to actually investigate them. So why won't God heal amputees? Why aren't we seeing scientific evidence for things that are far beyond this that would at least be a beginning? When I talk to people about the resurrection or debate this, they'll say, what if an asteroid hit the moon and spelled out in letters that everybody could read, I am the Lord thy God? Would you then believe in the supernatural? And my answer is no, but I would believe that that event happened that I observed. And knowing that an event happened doesn't mean that you know what the cause for that event is. And so I'm not denying that it's supernatural. As a matter of fact, it might go quite a way to violating what we understand about how the natural world works, but I don't then have an explanation for it. The explanation for that event needs to be demonstrated. And what I find especially curious and especially telling is that all of these Christians, all of these theists will come up with an example like a comet smashing into the moon and spelling out letters in order to try to claim that, see, Matt's just so unreasonable, he wouldn't even be convinced in that circumstance, when you don't have anything that is fucking remotely comparable to that to begin with. What you have are ancient reports and people saying, oh, I saw this, and it's fundamentally identical to when we were going after witches and people were saying, oh, she turned me into a newt, but I got better. We don't allow spectral evidence in court, and science doesn't get to make appeals to the supernatural. And that's not a failing of science, and it's not the fault of reasonable people that the things you believe cannot demonstrate their reasonableness.
Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying, but again, the principle of induction undergirds every single law of science and logic that we know of. And from a universe of time and chance acting on matter, it becomes an emotional commitment of faith.
So you are saying, are you suggesting that we're just emotionally blocked?
No, what I'm suggesting is that it is blind faith to adhere to the principle of induction from your worldview.
What the hell does that have to do with whether or not you can demonstrate a God or anything supernatural?
Because the supernatural would be the presupposition of the natural, and from your worldview...
No, it's not.
It is.
No. The natural is demonstrable. Whether or not there's something more than natural hasn't been demonstrated yet. Induction isn't just blind faith. Induction is a method that consistently produces reliable results, and at no point is the principle of induction saying that things cannot change or that there's something exempting this. Nothing at all. We're talking about something that works, that we all use, that we all recognize works, and at no point are we asserting that something else can't be possible. All we're saying is, if you are convinced there's something else happening, you have to come with some evidence. Not just, well, the principle of induction means you have to assume naturalism, and therefore you're precluding supernatural, and now it's emotional. That's not the way this shit works.
That is exactly the way it works. And if
okay. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You can still address it.
I was just going to ask, with this way in which he's thinking, if he saw on the moon the words very much etched in that said that Vishnu is God, would he take that as evidence to be that Vishnu's God?
I don't know. But that's evidently not the way this stuff works.
No, it isn't.
But we are 25 minutes over the time. There are people on the other side of the glass who are now hungry. We have made it entirely through the queue. I want to thank you again for coming on for a second week.
My pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Phil, and also thanks to Phil. And please take a look at the Women of Color Conference and Recovering from Religion Psychotherapy Project, all of those things that we try to bring awareness to, so that if you're the type of person who has found your way for your religion or are in the process of doing that, or you have questions, there are people that you can reach out to. If you're the kind of person who wants to say that's not the word that's in the book, you can call this show and we'll hang up on you. If you're the type of person who wants to call in and tell us that we are essentially emotionally blocked because of a principle of induction, when we're sitting here telling you that we are not saying these things can't or don't happen, we're just asking for evidence, and then when we ask you if you have evidence and you say no, thanks for showing we're right. There's the folks on the other side of the wall who make this show happen. Huge round of applause to all of our volunteers and all the people who showed up. Next week, Tracy will be on. You guys enjoy your week and a happy Mother's Day. Happy Masturbation Month. I'm sorry you missed Naked Gardening Day if you did, but we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.